You read in the newspapers, or you hear on the way that, of course, there will have been, people would have been prepared for this.
The royal household is currently operating at a level of intensity rarely seen in decades, and a shocking new development has just sent shockwaves through the palace. Whispers are turning into an official firestorm. Reports indicate that Princess Anne, long known as the monarchy's most steadfast protector, has taken the unprecedented step of removing 5 members of the Parker-Bowles family from the official royal records, with what sources claim is the secret personal approval of King Charles himself. Is this the beginning of a massive restructuring of the House of Windsor, or is there a deeper, darker reason behind this sudden and total erasure? From rumors of security breaches to long-standing internal tensions, we're peeling back the layers to understand why this powerful move was made and what it means for the future of the monarchy. The names that disappeared. At some point in early 2006, 5 names connected to the Parker-Bowles family quietly dropped off official royal documentation. No fanfare, no coordinated leak, just an absence where there used to be a presence. The kind of thing that gets noticed first by the people who track these things obsessively. Royal correspondents, palace watchers, the researchers who cross-reference duchy accounts, and royal household records like it's a second job. And when they noticed, they started making calls. What came back was not a denial. It was silence, which, inside royal circles, is its own kind of answer. So, who exactly disappeared from that roster? Let's be specific because the names matter. Tom Parker-Bowles is the most recognizable. Camilla's son, food writer, author, television personality. He has spent years building his own public profile, largely independent of his mother's royal status. But that independence was always partially funded by proximity. Access to the right rooms, the right events, the right people. That access was tied, whether visibly or not, to his mother's position inside the palace. Some of that access just got a lot harder to justify. Laura Lopez is Camilla's daughter, lower profile than her brother, but no less connected. She has appeared at royal events, maintained relationships with palace staff, and benefited from the kind of quiet institutional goodwill that comes with being the queen consort's child. That goodwill has limits now, and those limits just got redrawn. Beyond Tom and Laura, 3 further names connected to the wider Parker-Bowles network reportedly lost their footing on various official lists. Patronages, advisory roles. The kind of soft appointments that don't generate headlines when they're given and barely generate them when they're taken away. That's by design. It's much easier to remove someone from a list nobody is publicly tracking. The removals span different categories of royal involvement. Some are financial, some are ceremonial, some are simply about access. The ability to show up at a palace event and be waved through rather than questioned. Lose that, and you lose more than people realize. Now here's the thing about how royal rosters work. These lists don't update themselves. Someone decides who stays and who goes. Someone reviews the names, weighs the optics, considers the timing, and makes the call. That process doesn't happen by accident, and it doesn't happen without a sign-off from above, which means 2 things happened here. Someone proposed these removals, and someone approved them. Princess Anne proposed them. King Charles approved them. That combination should stop you in your tracks for a second, because Anne is not a woman who gets involved in palace housekeeping unless she has a reason. She has spent 5 decades as one of the hardest working members of the royal family precisely by staying in her lane, doing her job, and refusing to get dragged into the interpersonal drama that has swallowed so many other royals whole. When Anne moves, it means something. And Charles approving action against his own wife's family? That's not a small thing. We'll get into exactly why he did it. But first, let's understand how these names got onto the roster in the first place. Because they didn't appear overnight. Go back 20 years. Charles and Camilla married in April 2005. It was a civil ceremony at Windsor Guildhall, attended by family and close friends. The late Queen Elizabeth did not attend the ceremony itself, though she hosted a reception afterward. The public reaction was mixed. A significant portion of Britain still associated Camilla with the breakdown of Charles and Diana's marriage. The palace knew that. The rehabilitation strategy was long and carefully managed. Part of that rehabilitation involved normalizing the Parker-Bowles family within royal spaces. Tom and Laura began appearing at events. Their names started showing up in the right places. Slowly, over years, the family became fixtures, not working royals, not on the front balcony at Buckingham Palace, but present, recognized, embedded. That process took the better part of 2 decades. What Anne just did took considerably less time, and that contrast tells you something important about how power works inside the palace. It takes years to build institutional presence. It takes one decision from the right person to start dismantling it. Here's a detail worth sitting with. Anne's own children, Peter Phillips and Zara Tyndall, were never placed on the royal payroll. That was a deliberate choice Anne made when they were young. They would not hold royal titles. They would not draw on palace resources. They would build their own lives. Peter works in sports management. Zara is an Olympic equestrian. Neither of them relies on crown adjacency for their income or their public profile. Anne made that call for her own kids. She has now, in effect, applied the same standard to someone else's. That's not an accident. That's a statement. Now, when these removals first filtered into royal press circles, the initial read from some commentators was that this was about the Andrew scandal. The palace is in cleanup mode. Anything that looks like nepotism, anything that looks like a family benefiting from royal proximity without earning it, is suddenly a liability. Remove it before someone else points it out. That reading isn't wrong, but it's incomplete. Because if this were purely about optics management in the wake of Andrew's arrest in February 2026, you'd expect the response to be broader, more sweeping. You'd expect palace communications teams to be driving it. You wouldn't expect it to trace back to one specific senior royal acting with specific intent toward one specific family. The fingerprints here are Anne's, not a committee member, not a communication strategy. Anne's. Which raises the question this section was always building toward. Was Anne acting on principle, on personal feelings, on instruction from William, who has been quietly consolidating authority for months, or on some combination of all three? We're going to work through each of those possibilities. But before we do, there's one more piece of this opening picture that needs to land. Camilla, by multiple accounts, did not see this coming. Not because she is naive about palace politics. She has survived things that would have broken most people. She navigated 20 years of public hostility and came out the other side as queen consort. She is not someone who misreads rooms easily. But this came from a direction she wasn't watching. She was watching William. She was watching the Andrew fallout. She was tracking the public pressure and managing her own position with the careful attention of someone who knows exactly how fragile royal standing can be. She wasn't watching Anne, and that, more than anything else about this story, tells you how precisely this was timed. 5 names. Gone before anyone thought to look for them. Now, let's talk about the woman who made it happen. What Anne actually thinks of the Parker Bowles clan. Here is something most people forget about Princess Anne. She was there for all of it, not on the sidelines, not reading about it in the papers. She was inside the family when Charles and Camilla's affair was an open secret among the royals. She was there when Diana was unraveling. She was there when the marriage collapsed publicly and the institution took damage it spent the next decade trying to repair. Anne watched every chapter of that story from the inside, and she never said much about it publicly. That's the thing about Anne. She doesn't need to. What she thinks tends to show up in what she does, not in interviews, not in carefully worded statements released through palace spokespeople, in decisions, in who she supports and who she doesn't, in where she shows up and where she pointedly doesn't. So let's look at the record. When Charles and Camilla married in April 2005, Anne attended. She sat in that Windsor Guildhall and witnessed the ceremony. She was present at the reception the Queen hosted afterward. Publicly, she was supportive. She has never made a statement against Camilla, not once. But there is a significant difference between accepting someone's presence and welcoming their extended family into the institution you have spent your entire life serving. Anne has never been photographed at a social event with Tom Parker Bowles. There is no record of her championing Laura Lopes for any royal role or patronage. The wider Parker Bowles network, the cousins, the connected names, the people who drifted into royal adjacency as Camilla's status rose. Anne has kept a consistent and notable distance from all of them. That's not an accident. Anne doesn't accidentally keep distance from people. Now, go back further, before the marriage, before the affair became public knowledge. Anne and Charles grew up together, and that relationship matters here. They are the 2 eldest children of Queen Elizabeth. They share something the younger royals don't: a memory of the institution before it became a global media spectacle, a sense of what the crown is supposed to look like when it's functioning correctly. Anne has spoken in interviews about duty in a way that sounds almost old-fashioned now. She means it. She has carried out more public engagements per year than almost any other working royal for decades. She does not complain about it. She does not seek credit for it. She just does it. That value system is directly relevant to how she sees the Parker Bowles situation. Because from Anne's perspective, the question was never really about Camilla. Camilla married Charles. That's done. That's settled. Anne is pragmatic enough to accept facts on the ground. The question for Anne was always about what came attached to Camilla. Tom Parker Bowles built a career in food media. Fine. Laura Lopez has her own life. Fine. But the moment their names started appearing on royal rosters, on patronage lists, in the orbit of duchy accounts and palace functions, something shifted. They weren't just Camilla's children anymore. They were becoming fixtures inside an institution that Anne believes should earn every name it carries. She watched that happen over 20 years. She didn't move immediately. That's also classic Anne. She is not impulsive. She picks her moment. Here's a concrete detail that royal watchers have pointed to for years. When Anne's own children were young, she made a deliberate and quite unusual choice for a senior royal. She decided Peter and Zara would not receive royal titles. They would not be HRH. They would not be set up with palace-adjacent income or institutional roles. They would go out and build something themselves. Peter Phillips works in commercial sports partnerships. Zara Tyndall won an Olympic silver medal in equestrian eventing and built a brand around that achievement. Neither of them has ever been on a royal payroll. Anne made sure of that. She wasn't being cruel to her own kids. She was being consistent with something she genuinely believes. The crown is not a resource to be distributed among family members. It is an institution with a specific purpose, and the people inside it should be there because they serve that purpose, not because of who they're related to. Apply that belief to the Parker Bowles family, and the conclusion writes itself. Now, sources who have observed Anne over the years describe her relationship with Camilla as correct, polite, functional at official events, but not warm, never particularly warm. There's a distinction Anne draws, quietly but consistently, between the personal and the institutional. She can be civil to Camilla at a state dinner and still believe, privately, that Camilla's family has no business accumulating royal access simply by virtue of that marriage. Those two positions are not contradictory for Anne. They're entirely consistent. What changed in early 2026 was the environment around that long-held position. Andrew's arrest in February created a palace under genuine pressure. William's growing authority gave institutional weight to the kind of reform Anne had privately supported for years. And Charles, dealing with his health and increasingly focused on legacy, was in a mindset where cleaning up loose ends made sense. Anne's views on the Parker Bowles roster didn't change. The conditions around those views finally caught up with them. One senior royal source put it simply: Anne has always believed the institution comes first. She just finally had the moment and the backing to act on it. So, now you understand what Anne thinks. The more complicated question is what Charles thinks. Because he didn't just allow this. According to sources, he actively sanctioned it. A husband, approving action against his own wife's family. That needs explaining. Charles's secret nod, and why he gave it. King Charles III turned 76 in November 2025. He celebrated quietly. No large public gathering. A small family event, low-key by royal standards. And if you looked at the photographs from that period, you could see it. The weight he's carrying. Not just the crown. The physical reality of a man in active cancer treatment trying to hold the shape of a functioning reign together. He was diagnosed in February 2024. The specific type was never disclosed publicly. What we know is that treatment started immediately and has continued since. He kept working through it. Engagements, audiences, state duties. The kind of discipline that doesn't get enough credit because it happens quietly, without drama, without the public knowing the full picture. But here's what that context means for this story. A king in that position thinks differently about decisions. He starts measuring things not just by what's right for today, but by what he leaves behind. Legacy becomes very concrete when your health is uncertain. And one of the things Charles has been quietly reckoning with is the question of what his reign will be remembered for beyond the scandals that surrounded it. Andrew is part of that reckoning. The Epstein connection, the 2019 BBC interview that became a masterclass in how not to handle a crisis. The arrest on February 2026. Charles watched all of it unfold and understood, perhaps better than anyone, how much damage one family member can do to an institution that takes centuries to build and can be destabilized in a single news cycle. So, when Anne came to him with the proposal to remove the Parker Bowles names, Charles didn't need a long conversation. He already knew she was right. That's the part people find hard to accept. That a man would sanction the removal of his wife's family from royal rosters. It sounds cold. It sounds like a betrayal. But Charles doesn't see it that way, and understanding his logic matters here. Charles has always separated the personal from the institutional more cleanly than people give him credit for. He loves Camilla. That is not in question. He fought for decades to be with her, endured years of public hostility, and stood by her through a rehabilitation process that required enormous patience from both of them. That love is real. But Tom Parker Bowles is not Camilla. Laura Lopes is not Camilla. The wider network of names that accumulated royal adjacency over 20 years of marriage. Those people are not the woman Charles married, and their presence on royal rosters is not a condition of his love for her. Charles is capable of holding both things at once, love for his wife, and a clear-eyed view that her family's institutional footprint had grown beyond what the current climate could support. There's a specific pressure point that sources keep returning to. William. Over the past 12 months, William's authority inside the palace has expanded significantly. Charles has been deliberate about that. He granted William and Kate the power to issue royal warrants in 2025, a privilege monarchs have historically kept close. He has publicly positioned William as the future in ways that go beyond the usual heir apparent framing. And privately, according to multiple sources, Charles has given William increasing latitude over decisions about the institution's direction. William had made his position on royal adjacency clear. Anyone drawing on crown proximity without a direct functional role was a liability. He had applied that thinking to Andrew's household. He had applied it to the broader question of which family members warranted public funding and which didn't. The Parker Bowles roster was, in William's view, exactly the kind of loose end that needed addressing. Charles heard that. And rather than creating a conflict between his son and his wife's family, he found a third path. He let Anne do it. That's the move people are missing. Charles didn't go to Camilla and tell her directly. He didn't issue a formal palace directive. He gave Anne his quiet approval and let her carry it, which means the decision has cover. It looks like institutional housekeeping rather than a husband making a unilateral call about his wife's relatives. It's cleaner, it's undeniable, and it achieves exactly the same outcome. This is Charles operating the way he has always operated at his best, not through confrontation, through architecture, setting up the conditions for a decision to happen without being the visible hand behind it. Now, did Camilla know her husband had sanctioned this? That question is harder to answer. Sources suggest Charles did not tell her in advance. Whether that was deliberate or simply a matter of how quickly it moved is unclear. What is clear is that when the removals became known inside palace circles, Camilla's reaction indicated she had not been prepared for it. She was composed publicly. She is always composed publicly. But the people around her noticed the shift. There's one more layer to this that hasn't been widely discussed. Charles and Anne have a relationship that runs deeper than most royal observers account for. They are the two oldest. They grew up in a household defined by duty above all else. They both absorbed that value completely, in different ways and with different expressions, but it's the same root belief. The institution is bigger than any of the people inside it. When Anne came to Charles with this proposal, she wasn't asking him to choose between his wife and the crown. She was giving him a way to serve the crown without having that conversation with Camilla at all. He took it, and now the Parker Bowles family is left dealing with the consequences of a decision that was made above them, around them, and entirely without their input. Which brings us to Camilla, and what she actually lost here, because it's more than 5 names on a list. Camilla's corner, who she still has and who just left start with what Camilla still has. Because it's considerable. She is Queen Consort of the United Kingdom. She lives at Buckingham Palace. She has a full complement of royal staff, official duties, and the public backing of a king who has never wavered in his support for her personally. She appears at state functions, hosts audiences, carries out engagements. On paper, her position looks secure. But position and influence are two different things. And it's the influence that's been shifting. Let's take stock of what the Parker Bowles removals actually cost her in practical terms. Tom Parker Bowles lost something specific, not a title, not a formal role. What he lost was the invisible infrastructure that royal adjacency provides, the calls that get returned faster, the invitations that arrive without being chased, the sense inside certain rooms that his presence is expected and welcome. That infrastructure was never written down anywhere, but it was real, and it derived almost entirely from his mother's position inside the palace. When your name disappears from the right lists, the infrastructure starts to quietly dismantle itself. Doors don't slam. They just stop opening as easily. Laura Lopes feels it differently. She has maintained a lower public profile than her brother, which means her royal adjacency was always more personal than professional. Access to family events, the ability to move through palace spaces without the friction that outsiders face, inclusion in the small gatherings that never make the papers but matter enormously in terms of where you stand within the family structure. That inclusion is now less certain, and in a family where certainty of standing is everything, less certain means something significant. Beyond Tom and Laura, the three additional names that dropped off various rosters represented something Camilla had spent years carefully constructing. A presence, a sense that the Parker Bowles family had genuinely arrived inside the institution, not just as appendages of the Queen Consort, but as recognized participants in the broader royal world. That construction just took serious damage. Now, here's what makes Camilla's position particularly complicated right now. The people she would normally turn to for support inside the palace are themselves navigating their own pressures. Charles is her husband and her most reliable ally. That hasn't changed. But Charles is also the man who quietly sanctioned what just happened to her family. She may not know the full extent of his involvement, or she may know exactly and be choosing not to confront it directly. Either way, leaning on Charles for support over this specific situation puts her in an almost impossible position. William is the other gravitational force inside the palace right now, and William's relationship with Camilla has always been functional rather than warm. He attends the same events, he is civil, he is professional, but sources who observe their interactions closely describe a consistent distance that has never fully closed. William was a 15-year-old boy when his mother died. That fact sits underneath every interaction he has with his father's second wife, whether anyone acknowledges it or not. Camilla knows she does not have William's ear on this. She probably never expected to. What she may not have fully anticipated is Kate. Catherine, Princess of Wales, has been expanding her role inside the palace at a pace that has caught some observers off guard. Her recovery from cancer treatment, handled with remarkable transparency throughout 2024, generated a level of public affection that translated directly into institutional authority. People who admire you publicly tend to back you internally, and Kate has used that backing carefully. She has been involved in key palace decisions around the Andrew fallout. She has coordinated with staff on public response strategies. She is, by multiple accounts, functioning as a genuine co-strategist alongside William, rather than a supportive figure standing adjacent to the decision-making. For Camilla, that's uncomfortable. Not because she and Kate have an openly hostile relationship. They don't. Their public interactions are warm enough. But there is a structural reality here that is hard to ignore. The woman accumulating influence inside the palace right now is not Camilla's ally. She is Camilla's successor. And every step Kate takes toward the center of palace authority is a step that redefines where the current Queen Consort stands in relation to it. Camilla's most reliable personal support right now sits outside the palace. Her sister, Annabelle Elliot, who was removed from the Duchy of Cornwall payroll when William took over, understands exactly what this kind of institutional exclusion feels like. They are close. They talk. But Annabelle's own removal means she is no longer in a position to provide the kind of inside counsel she once could. Sarah Ferguson is another name that keeps surfacing in this context. Camilla and Sarah have maintained their friendship despite enormous pressure to distance. Ferguson's name appearing in released Epstein documents created a new round of that pressure in early 2026. William has made his position on that friendship clear. He considers it a liability. Camilla has not walked away from it. That stubbornness is costing her. Every time Sarah Ferguson's name appears in a headline connected to the Epstein case, Camilla's decision to maintain that friendship becomes harder for palace strategists to defend. So, map it out. Charles is supportive, but compromised on this specific issue. William is focused on reform and not on protecting Camilla's family interests. Kate is ascending. Annabelle is sidelined. Sarah Ferguson is a liability Camilla refuses to drop. The circle around Camilla is tighter than it has been at any point since she became queen consort. She has survived tighter circles before. That's worth remembering, but she has never navigated one where the pressure was coming from this many directions at once, and where the person who just moved against her family did so with her own husband's blessing. That last part is the part that doesn't go away easily. Anne's endgame, what she's really protecting. In 1973, Princess Anne competed at the European Eventing Championships. She won. The following year, she represented Great Britain at the Montreal Olympics. She was the first British royal to compete at an Olympic Games. No special treatment, no royal exemption from the qualifying process. She earned her place on that team the same way every other athlete did. That detail matters, not because it's impressive, though it is. It matters because it tells you exactly how Anne thinks about merit. You earn your place, full stop. She has carried that standard into every corner of her royal life. More public engagements per year than almost any other working royal. Decades of it, quietly, consistently, without the kind of public profile that generates magazine covers or social media followings. She doesn't work for visibility. She works because she believes that's what the role requires. Now apply that to what just happened with the Parker Bowles names. Anne wasn't settling a personal score. She doesn't operate that way. What she was doing was applying the same standard she has applied to everything else, including her own children, to a situation that had been bothering her for years. The Parker Bowles names on those rosters represented something specific to Anne. They represented the old way, the way things used to work inside royal circles, where proximity to power translated automatically into access, appointments, and quiet financial benefit, where who you were related to mattered more than what you actually contributed. Anne has spent 50 years pushing against that model, not loudly, not through public statements or reform campaigns, through consistent personal examples. Peter Phillips and Zara Tindall are proof of that. Anne chose deliberately not to give them royal titles. That decision was unusual enough at the time to generate genuine comment inside palace circles. Why would a senior royal voluntarily reduce her children's status? Because Anne didn't see it as a reduction. She saw it as a gift, the gift of building something real without the crown as a crutch. Peter and Zara did exactly that. And Anne looks at what her children built and sees the model she wanted: independence, credibility, a relationship with the public based on actual achievement rather than inherited proximity. The Parker Bowles situation was the inverse of that model, and it had been sitting there on official rosters for 20 years. Here's the timing element that tends to get overlooked. Anne didn't move on this during the relatively stable years of Charles's early reign. She waited. She waited until the environment inside the palace made the move both necessary and defensible. Andrew's arrest in February 2026 created that environment. The public appetite for the palace to demonstrate genuine accountability was at its highest point in years. Removing names connected to royal adjacency, names that couldn't be justified on merit grounds, was exactly the kind of concrete action that matched that moment. Anne read the moment, then she moved. There's one more thing she's protecting that doesn't get discussed enough: her own legacy inside the institution. Anne is 75 years old. She has given more to the crown than almost anyone alive, and she is watching the monarchy navigate what may be its most consequential transition since the abdication crisis. The shift from Charles to William is not just a generational handover. It is a fundamental reimagining of what the institution is and how it operates. Anne wants to be on the right side of that reimagining, not for political reasons, because she genuinely believes William's direction is correct. Smaller, tighter, more accountable. Fewer people drawing on royal proximity without justification. She didn't just support that direction from the sidelines, she acted on it. The Parker Bowles removals are Anne's contribution to the institution she has served her entire life. A concrete, deniable, precisely timed demonstration that the old rules no longer apply. And if that costs Camilla's family their place on the roster, Anne has made her peace with that. The institution for Anne has always come first. It still does. The reaction. Inside the palace, and what happens next. Tom Parker Bowles published a restaurant review the week after the removals became known in palace circles. Cheerful, well-written, completely normal by his usual standards. He gave no indication publicly that anything had changed. That's either composure or he hasn't fully mapped out what the loss of that access means yet. Either way, the silence from Parker Bowles' side has been notable. No briefings to friendly journalists. No quiet pushback through royal correspondence. Nothing. That silence tells you something. When people inside royal circles feel wronged and have the means to push back, they usually do. Subtly, through the right channels, but they do it. The fact that nothing has surfaced suggests one of two things. Either the family has been advised to stay quiet and is following that advice, or they understand that making noise about this would only draw attention to exactly the kind of royal adjacency the palace is trying to move away from. Complaining publicly that you lost your place on a royal roster is not a good look when the institution is under pressure to demonstrate accountability. The Parker Bowles family, whatever they feel privately, appear to have grasped that reality. Inside the palace, the reaction has been more layered. Among staff who have worked closely with Anne, there was no surprise. People who know how she operates recognize the move immediately. One source described it as vintage Anne. No announcement, no drama, just a decision made and implemented. Done. Among those closer to Camilla, the reaction was different. Sources describe a quiet fury contained behind the professional composure that everyone in that circle has learned to maintain. The anger isn't just about the removals themselves, it's about the manner of it. No conversation, no warning, no opportunity to manage it internally before it filtered out into royal press circles. Camilla is a woman who values loyalty fiercely. She has stayed close to Sarah Ferguson despite enormous institutional pressure to cut that tie. She maintained friendships through decades of public hostility when many others would have retreated entirely. Loyalty is not an abstract concept to her. It's a practice. What happened here felt like the opposite of that. And the fact that her own husband had quietly sanctioned it makes the dynamic inside the palace considerably more tense than anything visible from the outside. Charles and Camilla have not by any account had an open confrontation about this. Their public appearances together since February have been measured and composed. A state function in early March. A joint engagement shortly after. Nothing that would indicate visible fracture, but composed public appearances are not the same as a resolved private situation, and people inside the household know the difference. William's reaction has been the most interesting of all, because he hasn't really had one, at least not visibly. He didn't need to. Anne did what needed doing. Charles provided the cover. William's position is clean. He can pursue his reform agenda without having personally moved against his stepmother's family. The outcome he wanted was achieved without his fingerprints being the most visible ones on it. That's not an accident either. William has shown repeatedly over the past year that he understands how to achieve institutional outcomes without making himself the visible agent of every decision. It's a skill Charles developed over decades. William appears to have absorbed it faster. Kate's role in all of this has been characteristically focused. She is not involved in the Parker Bowles situation directly, but she is the person coordinating the broader palace response to the Andrew fallout, managing public communication strategy, and ensuring that William's reform agenda is being implemented consistently across the institution. The Parker Bowles removals fit that agenda. She doesn't need to comment on them specifically. They're already aligned with everything she and William are building. So, where does this leave things going forward? The 5 names are gone. That doesn't reverse. Royal rosters don't quietly reinstate people who have been removed, especially not in a climate where every appointment is being scrutinized for exactly the kind of proximity-based access that just got cut. What comes next depends largely on Camilla. If she accepts this as a line drawn and moves forward without pushing back institutionally, the situation stabilizes, uncomfortable but contained. If she pushes back, if she finds a way to restore her family's access or signals through back channels that she considers this unfinished business, she forces Charles into a choice he has so far managed to avoid making explicitly. And if Charles ever has to choose publicly between his wife and his son's vision for the monarchy's future, that becomes a different story entirely. Anne knows that. She almost certainly factored it in. The question is whether Camilla will give her the opportunity to find out. 5 names removed, no announcement, no apology. Anne moved, Charles nodded, and Camilla's family lost 20 years of quiet institutional access in what amounted to a single decision made above their heads and around them completely. This isn't just a family dispute, it's a signal. The palace is being restructured, and the people who built their position on proximity rather than purpose are finding out what that's worth in the current climate. The question now is simple. Is this where it stops? Or are there more names coming? Tell us what you think in the comments. And if you want to stay ahead of every palace shift as it happens, subscribe now. The next video is already going to surprise you.